Julian Vance, a reclusive millionaire forged in the silent discipline of special forces, returned to the hollowed-out town of his youth only to be paralyzed by the sight of a small girl, no older than 7, being publicly humiliated in the hushed sanctuary of the town library. The woman scolding her, a figure of immaculate poise whom he recognized with a jolt as his late sister's closest friend, Clara, wore a pristine white suit that seemed to actively mock the grime on the child's face and the tears streaking through it. Why would a child be treated with such vicious contempt over a simple, tattered picture book? And what insidious darkness had taken root in a life he once associated with sunshine and shared secrets? The air in Harmony Creek was thick with a cloying sweetness that Julian's memory couldn't place. It wasn't the scent of honeysuckle from the long-gone trellises of his childhood. It was something artificial, like a cheap air freshener trying to mask a persistent decay. He had come back to fulfill the last clause of a silent promise made to his sister Elara years ago. A promise to look after her best friend, Clara, and Clara's daughter, Lily, should anything ever happen to him. Now, with Elara gone and Julian having just extricated himself from a world of shadows and whispered commands, the roles were tragically reversed. He was here to check on them, to ensure the substantial support he provided from afar was fostering a life of peace and happiness. The scene unfolding before him in the library suggested a catastrophic failure. Clara's voice, though low, was a blade. "I have told you, Lily, that book is filthy. You will not bring it into the car. You will not bring it into my house. You are an embarrassment." Each word was a precise, calculated strike. The little girl, Lily, clutched a worn, soft-covered copy of The Velveteen Rabbit to her chest like a shield. Her knuckles were white, her small frame trembling. "Please," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of sound. "Please, give me back my book." The librarian, a woman with a kind face etched with helpless worry, looked down at her checkout counter, pretending to be absorbed in her work. A few other patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their gazes averted, becoming willing accomplices through their silence. They were the reluctant witnesses, trapped by the web of social influence Clara had so carefully woven around the town. Clara was a pillar of the community, the head of the Children's Charity Fund, a woman whose public face was one of beatific grace. Her private face, Julian was now seeing, was one of casual cruelty. He felt a familiar coldness settle in his gut, the same icy resolve that had guided him through desert nights and hostile jungles. He began to move. His footsteps were silent on the worn linoleum, a ghost from the town's past gliding into its troubled present. He stopped beside Clara, his shadow falling over both her and the child. He was a large man, not just in height but in presence, carrying in stillness that commanded attention more than any shout ever could. Clara turned, her scowl melting into a practiced, dazzling smile the moment she recognized him. "Julian! My goodness, what a surprise! I had no idea you were in town." She gestured dismissively toward the girl. "I'm so sorry you have to see this. Lily is having one of her difficult days. She gets so attached to things." Julian didn't return the smile. His gaze dropped to the little girl. Lily stared up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a desperate, flickering hope. In their depths, he saw the reflection of a promise he had failed to keep to his sister, the ghost of a protector who had arrived too late. He would not be too late again. He slowly knelt, bringing himself down to Lily's level. His movements were deliberate, unthreatening. He ignored Clara completely. "That looks like a very important book," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that cut through the library's tense silence. Lily flinched, expecting another reprimand. When none came, she nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. She hugged the book tighter. "May I see it?" Julian asked gently. For a moment the child hesitated. Her eyes darted to Clara, who stood frozen, her smile now a brittle, cracking facade. Then, Lily looked back at Julian, at the quiet strength in his face, and slowly, with the reverence of a sacred offering, she extended the book to him. He took it carefully. The cover was soft as old linen, the corners rounded with countless turnings. He opened it, and the scent of old paper and, faintly, of his sister's favorite lavender perfume, rose to meet him. Tucked inside the front cover, written in Alara's familiar, looping script, were the words, "For my dearest Lily, remember you are real and you are loved. Always, Aunt Alara." A cold wave of understanding washed over him. This wasn't just a book. It was a relic. It was the last tangible piece of a love that Clara was trying to erase. He looked from the inscription to the child's grimy face, her threadbare coat, the palpable fear she wore like a second skin. He had been sending Clara a generous stipend every month for 5 years, an amount that could have clothed this child in velvet and fed her on sunshine. Where had it all gone? He stood up, the book held carefully in one hand. He met Clara's gaze, and for the first time, her polished mask of social grace faltered. She saw something in his eyes that she couldn't charm, couldn't bully, couldn't dismiss. She saw the truth of his past, a past he had never shared with her, a past that had equipped him to dismantle threats far more sophisticated than a small-town tyrant. "We're leaving," Julian said. It was not a request. He gently handed the book back to Lily, whose small fingers closed around it instantly. "Lily will be coming with me." "Now, just a moment," Clara began, her voice regaining its sharp, authoritarian edge. "You can't just—" "I can," Julian interrupted, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than her shout. "And I will. Get your things, Lily." The little girl looked at her supposed caretaker, then back at the tall, quiet man who held the entire room in a state of suspended animation. For the first time, a flicker of defiance lit her eyes. She took a step toward Julian, a silent declaration of allegiance. The spell of fear was broken. The protector had made his vow, and the investigation had just begun. The drive to Clara's house was a study in oppressive silence. Lily sat in the back of Julian's rental car, clutching her book, her eyes fixed on the window. Clara, in the passenger seat, radiated a furious energy, occasionally glancing at Julian as if trying to formulate the right combination of words to regain control. When they arrived at the pristine 2-story colonial that Julian's money paid for, the facade of perfection was jarring. The lawn was manicured, the flower beds bursting with vibrant, professionally arranged colors. It was a house that screamed of contentment and success. Inside, the illusion continued. The floors gleamed. The air smelled of lemon polish and potpourri. It was a magazine cover, sterile and untouched by the chaotic reality of life, especially life with a child. Clara immediately launched into her rehearsed defense. "Julian, I don't know what you think you saw back there, but Lily has behavioral issues. Serious ones. Her therapist says she uses this book as a crutch, a way to avoid dealing with reality. I'm only trying to help her." Julian walked through the living room, his eyes scanning everything. He saw the expensive art on the walls, the designer furniture, the crystal vases. He saw no toys, no scattered crayons, no childish drawings taped to the refrigerator. He saw no evidence of Lily at all. "Where is her room?" he asked, his voice flat. Clara's composure tightened. "Upstairs. But I don't think—" He was already moving, taking the polished wooden stairs 2 at a time. He didn't need her permission. He found the room at the end of the hall. The door was a heavy, dark wood, and it was fitted with a new, gleaming brass lock, a keyhole lock, the kind you would find on an exterior door. An alarm bell, cold and loud, went off in his mind. He turned the knob. It was unlocked. The room was a cell. A small cot was pushed against one wall, covered with a thin, gray blanket. A single, small dresser stood opposite it. The window was not only locked but had 2 small nails hammered into the sash, preventing it from being opened more than an inch. The walls were bare, painted a dull, institutional beige. There was no color, no life, no warmth. It was a room designed for containment, not for nurturing. It was the physical manifestation of the neglect he had seen in Lily's eyes. He turned back to see Clara standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. "It's for her own safety," she said, her voice hard. "She used to have nightmares. She would try to climb out the window. The lie was so blatant, so poorly constructed, it was insulting. Julian knelt and looked under the cot. There, in the deepest shadows, was a small, hidden stack of papers. He pulled them out. They were drawings, done in a single, faint pencil. One depicted a stick-figure girl, small and crying, inside a box with a lock on it. Outside the box, a large, smiling woman with sharp, triangular teeth held a giant key. Another drawing showed the little girl alone in a dark yard while the smiling woman watched from a brightly lit window. It was a child's nonverbal testimony, a portfolio of silent screams. He stood holding the drawings. He looked at Clara, and all the years of quiet grief for his sister, all the suppressed rage from a life spent fighting monsters, coalesced into a single point of cold, diamond-hard fury. "You've been cashing my checks," he said, the statement hanging in the dead air between them. "All of them, and this is what you've spent it on. Locks and nails." He made his decision. He would not just save this child. He would dismantle Clara's world, brick by fraudulent brick, until the entire town saw the monster behind the charitable smile. He took out his phone and made a call to a number he hadn't used in years. "Marcus, it's Vance. I need you. I'm in Harmony Creek. I'm sending you a name and an address. I want everything. Financials, communications, social connections. Everything. And I need it yesterday." He hung up. He looked at Lily, who had crept to the doorway and was watching him, her small face a canvas of confusion and fear. He knelt before her once more. "Lily," he said, his voice softer than he thought possible, "I'm going to take you away from here for a little while. We're going to go somewhere safe. Would you like that?" She didn't answer with words. She simply reached out a small, hesitant hand and placed it on his arm. It was a fragile, tentative gesture of trust. For Julian, it was a binding contract. The war had begun. Julian established a base of operations in a quiet, high-end hotel suite in the next town over. It was neutral ground, a sterile environment free from the ghosts of Harmony Creek. For the first day, Lily barely spoke. She explored the suite with a wary curiosity, touching the soft bedding and thick carpets as if they were alien artifacts. She kept her book with her at all times, a constant, silent companion. Julian didn't push. He knew from his training that trauma had its own timetable. He simply created an atmosphere of safety. He ordered her favorite foods, pancakes for breakfast, chicken noodle soup for lunch, small comforts that Clara had likely denied her. He sat quietly and read while she sat in a large armchair, her legs tucked beneath her, turning the pages of The Velveteen Rabbit for the 100th time. On the second day, she began to draw. Julian had bought a large set of colored pencils and a thick pad of paper. At first, her drawings were the same grim scenes from her bedroom. But slowly, new elements appeared. A yellow sun began to peek into the corner of the locked room. A small bluebird appeared outside the nailed-shut window. Hope was beginning to seep into the monochrome world of her trauma. While Lily drew, Julian worked. The preliminary report from Marcus, his former intel analyst and now a world-class private investigator, was damning. Clara was living a life of astounding luxury, all funded by the money Julian had sent for Lily's care. There were receipts from designer boutiques, charges for lavish spa days, and significant donations made in her own name to local charities. Donations that bought her social standing and the power to intimidate people like the town librarian. Most damning of all were the bank statements. They showed the monthly deposits from Julian's account, followed by a flurry of withdrawals and extravagant purchases, while the account designated for Lily's actual needs, food, clothing, school supplies, showed only minimal, paltry transactions. Clara wasn't just neglectful. She was a thief, systematically embezzling the child's lifeline to fund her own vanity. The next step was to find a corroborating witness. Julian remembered the worried face of the librarian, but he knew she was too exposed, her job too vulnerable. He needed someone with less to lose. His mind went to the neighborhood around Clara's house. He recalled an elderly woman who had been tending her roses in the yard next door when he arrived. She had watched his car pull up with a sharp, bird-like curiosity. He left Lily in the care of a trusted hotel staff member, a kind woman he had thoroughly vetted, and drove back to Harmony Creek. He found the neighbor, Mrs. Gable, pruning her rose bushes again, her movements slow and methodical. He introduced himself, explaining he was a friend of Alara's. At the mention of Alara's name, Mrs. Gable's guarded expression softened slightly. "A lovely girl," she murmured. "A terrible loss." "I'm worried about Lily," Julian said directly, dispensing with pleasantries. Mrs. Gable's hands stilled on a thorny stem. She looked over her shoulder toward Clara's perfect house, her face clouded with a mixture of fear and guilt. "We all are," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She's a sweet child. Too quiet." "Have you seen anything?" Julian pressed gently. "Heard anything?" The woman hesitated, wringing her gloved hands. "Clara. She has a lot of friends in this town. The mayor plays golf with her. She runs the children's gala. It's not wise to cross her." "I'm not asking you to cross her," Julian said, his voice steady and reassuring. "I'm asking you to help a child Alara loved. A child who was being hurt." That was the key. The appeal to the memory of someone she respected. Someone Clara's influence couldn't tarnish. Mrs. Gable's resolve seemed to harden. "The yelling," she said, her voice stronger now. "I hear her yelling at that little girl for the smallest things. A spilled glass of water, a smudge on the floor. And sometimes I see Lily outside, in the yard, for hours, even when it's cold. She just stands there watching the house. Waiting to be let back in." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "Last winter, during that first big snow, I saw her out there in just a thin sweater. I called over, asked if she was all right. Clara came to the door and smiled, saying Lily was being disciplined for tracking mud inside. She made it sound so reasonable. But it wasn't reasonable, Mr. Vance. It was cruel. It was the confirmation Julian needed. The emotional abuse was systematic and undeniable. He thanked Mrs. Gable, assuring her that he would protect her from any fallout. As he walked back to his car, he felt the pieces clicking into place. He had the financial evidence, the child's silent testimony through her drawings, and now, a reluctant but credible witness. But he knew he needed one more thing. A piece of evidence so definitive, so irrefutable, that it would detonate Clara's world in a single public explosion. He had a feeling he knew where to find it. It was hidden in plain sight, in the one thing Lily treasured most, the one thing Clara had tried so desperately to take from her. The book. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, her small face peaceful for the first time in what looked like years, Julian sat with the velveteen rabbit under the soft glow of a reading lamp. He handled it with forensic care, his large, capable hands surprisingly gentle. He had read the story to his own sister countless times. It was a story about becoming real through love, a theme that now felt like a bitter irony. He ran his fingers over the inscription from Alara, a fresh pang of grief hitting him. His sister had known, somehow. She had known Lily would need a reminder that she was loved. He began to turn the pages slowly, examining each one. He was looking for anomalies. A pressed flower, a folded note, anything tucked away. About halfway through, he felt it. A slight thickness between two pages, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. The pages were stuck together near the spine. Using the edge of a credit card, he carefully worked them apart. What he found inside made the blood run cold in his veins. It wasn't a note. It was a photograph and a folded, official-looking document. The photograph was of a young, smiling woman holding a baby Lily. The woman was not Clara. Julian recognized her instantly from old pictures Alara had kept. It was Amelia, Lily's mother, who had died from a sudden illness when Lily was just 2. Clara hadn't been Alara's best friend. Amelia had. Clara had been a peripheral figure, a social acquaintance who had moved in on the tragedy. The document was even more damning. It was a notarized letter from Amelia's parents, Lily's grandparents, who had passed away in a car accident a year after their daughter. The letter outlined the creation of a substantial trust fund for their granddaughter, Lily. It named a guardian to manage the funds until Lily turned 18. The original guardian listed was Elara Vance. But her name was crossed out. Written neatly below it, with a signature and a notary stamp dated shortly after Elara's death, was the name Clara Reeves. This was the twist he hadn't anticipated. Clara wasn't just a neglectful friend. She was a usurper. She had stepped into the void left by 3 tragic deaths and seized control of a small child and a large fortune. The trust wasn't just a monthly stipend from Julian. It was a multi-million-dollar inheritance meant to secure Lily's entire future, and Clara had been plundering it. Marcus's next report confirmed it all. He had dug deeper past the surface-level accounts and found the main trust. The withdrawals were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been funneled into shell accounts, used for investments in Clara's name, and spent on building her philanthropic empire. The annual Children's Gala, her signature event and the source of her social power, was almost entirely funded by money stolen from the child it was meant to help. This was the smoking gun. This was the weapon that would bring her down. Julian looked at the sleeping child in the next room, a little girl who had been systematically erased and impoverished by the very person entrusted with her care. The quiet rage in his chest burned with a white-hot intensity. He now had the means and the motive. All that remained was to choose the time and place for the execution of Clara's public life. And he knew just the occasion. The upcoming Children's Gala, the monument to her own hypocrisy, would become the stage for her downfall. With the evidence secure, Julian's next move was to build his legal arsenal. He flew to the city and met with Eleanor Albright, a legendary family law attorney known for her merciless approach to high-stakes custody battles. She was a shark in a silk blouse, and her office, overlooking the sprawling metropolis, felt like the command center for a war. He laid everything out on her vast mahogany desk. Marcus's financial reports, the trust documents, Lily's haunting drawings, a transcript of his conversation with Mrs. Gable, and the photograph of Lily's real mother. Ms. Albright listened without interruption, her sharp, intelligent eyes missing nothing. When he was finished, she leaned back in her chair, a grim, satisfied smile on her face. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of sentiment, "what you have here is not just a custody case. This is a criminal case. Grand larceny, embezzlement, fraud, child endangerment. The list is extensive. We can have her arrested quietly tomorrow." "No," Julian said firmly. "That's not enough. An arrest is quiet. The charges get buried in legal proceedings. She'll hire a good lawyer, plead it down, and in a few years, she'll re-emerge somewhere else, charming a new town, finding a new victim. I want her reputation obliterated. I want her so thoroughly exposed that she can never use the shield of charity and good intentions again." Ms. Albright raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "You want to make an example of her." "I want justice for Lily," he corrected. "Loud, public, and undeniable. The Children's Gala," she mused, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Her crowning achievement. The mayor will be there. The press. It's a high-risk stage, Mr. Vance. If we misstep, she could paint you as a vindictive, unstable man harassing a grieving widow." "She's not a widow," Julian stated coldly. "She was never married to Lily's father. That was another part of her lie. And we won't misstep." They spent the next 4 hours meticulously planning the confrontation. Ms. Albright's team began drafting emergency custody orders and filing motions that would remain sealed until the precise moment they chose to strike. Marcus was tasked with setting up a discreet audiovisual system at the gala venue. Mrs. Gable, emboldened by the promise of Ms. Albright's legal protection, agreed to provide a sworn video testimony, her gentle, grandmotherly voice lending unimpeachable sincerity to her account of the neglect. As the day of the gala approached, Clara, sensing a shift in the power dynamic, made her countermove. She called Julian, her voice a syrupy concoction of feigned concern. "Julian, darling," she began, "I've been so worried. You have Lily with you, and I haven't heard a word. People are starting to talk. They're saying you've become obsessive, that your grief over Alara might be clouding your judgment. I'm only thinking of what's best for Lily. Perhaps it's time for her to come home." It was a classic gaslighting tactic, an attempt to preemptively discredit him by painting him as mentally unstable. She was trying to turn the town's gossip mill against him, to isolate him before he could act. "Lily is fine," Julian replied, his voice calm and unreadable. "She's safe. We'll be seeing you soon, Clara." He hung up before she could respond. The threat was clear. She felt her control slipping, and she was pushing back. But she was pushing against a mountain. She had no idea of the avalanche that was about to be unleashed. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The entire edifice of lies Clara had built was about to come crashing down around her, in front of the very audience she had cultivated to admire it. The night of the Harmony Creek Children's Charity Gala was a masterpiece of self-congratulatory pomp. The town's elite, dressed in their finest, mingled in the grand ballroom of the local country club, the air buzzing with polite chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses. The event was the culmination of Clara's social climbing, a testament to her manufactured benevolence. A large banner bearing her smiling face hung above the stage, with the words "Clara Reeves, a champion for our children." Clara herself was radiant, gliding through the crowd in a shimmering silver gown, accepting accolades and donations with a practiced humility that made Julian's stomach turn. He watched from the shadows at the back of the room, a silent, imposing figure in a perfectly tailored dark suit. Beside him stood Ms. Albright, radiating an aura of lethal competence. Lily was not with them. She was safely ensconced in a nearby suite with a child psychologist and Marcus, waiting for the signal. The moment arrived when Clara took the stage to give the keynote address. A hush fell over the room as she stepped into the spotlight. She began her speech, her voice resonating with carefully rehearsed emotion. "Tonight," she said, placing a hand over her heart, "we come together for the most vulnerable among us, for the children who have no voice. It is our sacred duty to protect them, to nurture them, to provide for them a sanctuary of love and safety." The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost breathtaking. As she spoke, Julian began to walk forward. He moved not with aggression, but with an inexorable, deliberate purpose that drew every eye in the room. He didn't rush the stage. He simply walked to the small set of stairs at its side and ascended, coming to a stop a few feet behind Clara. The murmuring in the crowd swelled. Clara, sensing the disruption, faltered in her speech. She turned, and her face went pale beneath her makeup when she saw him. "Julian," she hissed, her smile a desperate, painted-on grimace. "This is highly inappropriate. This is not the time or the place." "On the contrary, Clara," Julian said, his voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone she had been using. "This is the perfect time, and this is the perfect place." He turned to the audience. "My apologies for the interruption. My name is Julian Vance. For the last 5 years, I have been a silent benefactor to Mrs. Reeves, providing what I believed were funds for the care of a little girl we both loved. I came here tonight because I, like all of you, was led to believe that Clara Reeves is a champion for children." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I was wrong." At that moment, the large screen behind Clara, which had been displaying a slideshow of smiling children, flickered to life. It now showed a crystal-clear image of the first page of Lily's trust document, the names of her mother and grandparents clearly visible. "This is a trust," Julian announced, "established for Lily by her maternal grandparents. A trust that named my late sister, Alara, as its guardian. A trust that Clara Reeves fraudulently seized control of after their deaths." The screen changed again, now displaying a flow chart Marcus had prepared, showing vast sums of money moving from the trust account into Clara's personal accounts, and then out to luxury retailers, investment firms, and a single, large recipient. The Harmony Creek Children's Charity Gala. Gasps rippled through the audience. Clara lunged for the microphone. "He's lying. This is slander. He's unstable, driven by grief." "Am I?" Julian asked softly. As if on cue, Mrs. Gable's face appeared on the screen. Her kind, Worried voice filled the silent ballroom as she recounted, in heartbreaking detail, the story of seeing Lily shivering in the snow, of hearing Clara's constant, cruel tirades. The final piece of evidence was the most powerful. Ms. Albright walked to the foot of the stage, and by her side was Lily. She was no longer the grimy, terrified child from the library. She was dressed in a simple, clean dress, her hair neatly brushed. She held her copy of The Velveteen Rabbit in her hands. Clara stared, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. "Get her out of here!" she shrieked, her voice cracking, the mask of the gentle philanthropist finally shattering into 1,000 pieces. The mayor, a portly man who had been applauding Clara moments before, stepped forward, his face a grim mask. He knelt before Lily. "Honey," he said gently, "that woman on the stage, has she been good to you?" Lily looked at the glittering, panicked woman in the spotlight. Then she looked at Julian, who gave her a single, reassuring nod. She clutched her book to her chest and looked directly at the mayor. Her voice was small but carried with perfect clarity through the silent room. "She took my mommy's book," Lily said. "She locked me in my room. She said I wasn't real." The simple, devastating truth landed with the force of a physical blow. A collective wave of pity and outrage washed through the crowd. Clara's breakdown was complete. She began to sob, a theatrical, self-pitying sound at first, which quickly devolved into a string of venomous denials and accusations. "She's a liar, a difficult, ungrateful little liar. I gave her everything. That money was mine. I deserved it." Her confession, screamed in a fit of narcissistic rage, sealed her fate. 2 uniformed police officers, who had entered discreetly at Julian's signal, walked onto the stage. They flanked her, their presence calm and official. The public humiliation was absolute. The champion for children was exposed as a monster, her fall from grace as swift as it was brutal. As they led her away, a disgraced and pathetic figure, Julian walked over to Lily, knelt down, and wrapped her in a protective embrace. The applause that slowly began to fill the room was not for Clara or her sham charity. It was for the quiet man who had brought the truth into the light, and for the little girl who had finally found her voice. The aftermath was swift and total. Clara Reeves was charged with a litany of crimes, and with the mountain of evidence Julian and Ms. Albright had compiled, her conviction was a foregone conclusion. The trial was short. Stripped of her social standing and financial resources, she was a hollowed-out shell of her former self. The court sentenced her to a lengthy prison term for embezzlement and child endangerment, her name becoming a cautionary tale in the town she had once ruled. Julian, acting through his lawyer, quietly dismantled her fraudulent charity and redirected its assets, including the proceeds from the ill-fated gala, into Lily's now secure trust fund. He was granted full and permanent legal guardianship of Lily without contest. He sold the sterile, perfect house in Harmony Creek, erasing it from their lives. He took Lily far away, to a place of healing and peace. A secluded cottage he owned on the coast, nestled in a cove where the sound of the ocean was a constant, soothing whisper. The house was the opposite of Clara's prison. It was filled with light, with open windows that let in the salty air, and with comfortable, well-worn furniture. There were no locks on the interior doors. The first few weeks were quiet. Lily was learning how to live without fear. She would watch Julian, her gaze thoughtful, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. He never pushed her to talk about what had happened. Instead, he taught her how to build sandcastles, how to identify seabirds, how to skip stones across the placid surface of the cove at sunset. He read to her every night, from a growing library of books he had bought, but he never touched the Velveteen Rabbit. He understood it was hers alone, a sacred link to her past, to her mother and to Alara. It sat on her nightstand, a silent guardian. The transformation was gradual but profound. The haunted, vacant look in her eyes was replaced by a bright spark of curiosity. Her shoulders, once perpetually hunched in a defensive posture, began to relax. A small, tentative smile started to appear more frequently, and then, one afternoon, As a playful wave chased her up the beach, she laughed. It was a clear, beautiful sound, like wind chimes in a summer breeze. To Julian, it was the sound of victory. He was no longer just a protector, he was becoming a parent. His own ghosts, the guilt over not being there for Alara, began to recede, replaced by the demanding, fulfilling reality of caring for this resilient little girl. One evening, as Julian sat on the wide porch watching the last light of day paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lily came out of the house. She was wearing her pajamas and holding her precious book. She walked over to him and, without a word, climbed into the chair beside him, curling up against his side. For a long while, they just sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rhythmic crash and sigh of the waves. Then, she did something that marked the true beginning of their new life. She held up the velveteen rabbit, offering it to him. "Will you read it to me?" she asked, her voice soft but sure. Julian looked down at the tattered book, then into her trusting eyes. This was more than a request to hear a story. It was an invitation. She was sharing her most treasured possession, the last remnant of her old life, and asking him to make it part of their new one. It was the ultimate act of faith, the final, definitive transfer of her safety into his hands. A lump formed in his throat. He took the book with a reverence that matched her own. "Of course," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He opened it to the first page, his arm wrapped securely around her small shoulders, and began to read the familiar, timeless words about how a toy becomes real. In the fading light, with the sound of the ocean as their soundtrack, the soldier and the child, two souls rescued from the quiet darkness, began to build their own reality, one founded not on blood, but on a promise kept and a love that was, at long last, true and unconditional. How often does the greatest cruelty disguise itself as charity? How many silent victims are told they are difficult, that their pain is an inconvenience, that their truth is a lie? The world is full of loud, confident monsters who build their thrones on the quiet suffering of others. They host galas, smile for cameras, and speak of compassion while their hearts remain cold. Empty rooms with locks on the doors. Their strength is an illusion, a fragile facade built of fear and deception. True strength is not found in the spotlight, but in the shadows where goodness does its work unseen. It is the quiet courage of a neighbor who finally decides to speak up. It is the unwavering resolve of a protector who refuses to look away. And it is the incredible resilience of a child who, despite everything, holds onto a single book as a reminder that love is real, and that they are real, too. Evil makes a great deal of noise, but its foundations are sand. Goodness is often quiet, but its roots are stone. In the end, the tide always comes in, and the truth, like the ocean, washes everything clean. Have you ever witnessed an act of quiet courage that changed someone's life? Have you seen a small gesture of kindness stand up against a large injustice? We would be honored to read your stories in the comments below. Thank you for being a part of this community, and may you always have the strength to be a voice for those who have none.